everyone, Suzanne here. I hope you're all well and welcome to So Custom. Today's video is going to be how I made this super quick, super easy little PussyBow blouse. So if you're interested in seeing that, then let's get started.
Starting with the fabric, I'm using this super lightweight crepe fabric. It's in this lovely petrol blue colour, very fluid and perfect for a little top like this. And then onto the cutting out. This is my back piece. My fabric underneath is on the fold. I have one notch just to the centre of the neck, and I've reduced the sleeve length just by an inch. My front piece, I've done exactly the same thing here, so I've reduced my sleeve length by an inch, and I've done that because I wanted to get this little top out of 1 metre of fabric. I've given myself a little bit of a V-neck at the front and a centre front seam. And for those of you that are interested in patterning, the base of this I have already uploaded how to make it. I've just made those little adjustments I just mentioned. And then for the last pattern piece, this is my necktie. I have it on the fold at the right hand side of the pattern and on the fold at the bottom. I have 2 notches, one at my shoulder and one at the V, and I've just given myself a little point at the bottom. So that's all my cutting out complete, and now for the construction. So first of all, I want to sew up my centre front seam. So I'm laying my 2 front pieces right sides together and pinning and stitching here at my 1 centimetre seam allowance, back stitching at the start and the end, and that's how that looks. And I just want to clean up that edge. So to do that, I want to conceal all of the raw edges in underneath. So I've pressed that seam open, and then as you can see here, I'm just turning in that raw edge in underneath on both sides. Popping a little pin there just to hold it, giving it a little bit of a press before pinning in place the whole way down. I have a video on this seam finish already, which I shall link down below. It's quite a quick little video. And on to the stitching. So I'm stitching here with a little bit of a longer stitch length, right along the crease edge you just see me give myself. Back stitching at the start and the end. And once both sides are complete, this is how it looks. So it's super neat on the inside and gives a lovely little bit of interest on the outside. So love this finish. And now for the shoulder seams. So as I say, I want the inside of this little top to be really clean, nicely finished. So I've chosen to do French seams on the rest of this top. So I've laid my back over my front, wrong sides together and pinned along those shoulder seams. And I'm stitching here at about half of my seam allowance, the whole way along, back stitching at the start and the end. And then the second stage of the French seam is to trim the excess seam allowance down. So I've just taken off about 2/3 there, and then giving that seam a nice press before turning my fabric right sides together, pressing again and then pinning in place. And now I'm ready to stitch. So again, I'm going to stitch at about half of my seam allowance, back stitching at the start and the end. And that is my shoulder seam complete. And of course I do the same on the other side. Give it a nice press, and that's how it looks. And now that my shoulder seam's complete, I'm ready to finish the hem of my sleeve. So I'm just pressing in underneath by about 1 centimetre and pinning in place before stitching as close as I can get to that crease edge. So I'm only about 2 or 3 millimeters away from the crease edge. I've backstitched at the start and the end, and that's my first roll complete. I just need to trim down that edge, fold again before sewing for the second roll. So that's my edge all trimmed. I'm giving it a little bit of a press before going back to the machine to complete my rolled hem. So I'm stitching here right along the edge. I'm using a little bit of a longer stitch length, backstitching at the start and the end. And that's my rolled hem complete. And from the inside, that's how it looks. And the outside, super neat. And after a little bit of a press, that's how it looks. So love that. So now to deal with the tie. So I'm just laying my tie right sides together, and I'm going to pin from the point at the bottom up to the notch you see me showing here. That's the notch at the bottom of my V. And I'm going to stitch from the point up to that notch at my 1 centimeter seam allowance on both sides. So back stitching at the start, little bit of a pivot at my corner, at my 1 centimeter seam allowance as I say, and back stitching at the notch. And I'm going to snip into that notch a little bit further, just up to that last stitch. That will help me on my next step. And here I've just turned the tie right side out and given it a nice press. And then from the notch where you've seen me stop sewing, I've pressed one of those edges in underneath by my seam allowance, so by my 1 centimeter. And then the other side that is unpressed, I'm now lining up with my neckline, starting at the center, then lining up my notch with my shoulder, pinning, and then the notch with the bottom of my V, and pinning, and doing the same on the other side. And that's me all pinned in place, ready to stitch. So I'm starting at the V and back stitching. I was trying to be really accurate at the V there, making sure I was starting exactly at my notch edge. And I'm doing the same thing at the end as well. So at the V, trying to make sure I'm being super accurate. So now I just need to trim that seam allowance down, which I've went ahead and done off camera. So you can see that here. I've pressed it towards the tie and I'm ready to close up the whole inside. So I'm laying that crease edge over the top of my seam allowance, sandwiching it in between my outer and inner part of my tie. And I'm just going to try and sew as accurately as I can along that crease edge. So this is just concealing all of the raw edges and making sure it's super neat and tidy on the inside. I'm using that little bit of a longer stitch length again. So that's how it looks from the inside. And from the outside, nice and neat and clean. So I've just given it a little bit of a press, tied the knot in my tie, and that's how it looks. And now I'm ready to close up my side seams. So I'm sewing my side seams in exactly the same way as I sewed the shoulder seams. So this is my first stitch line. My fabric is wrong sides together. I've sewn that line at 5mm, so half of my seam allowance. Trimmed back that seam allowance, popped my fabric right sides together, and I'm now sewing again at 5mm, back stitching at the start and the end. So that's my French seam complete on my side seams. And that's how that looks. So now the very last thing I have to do is finish the hem. And I'm going to do that in exactly the same way as I finished the hem on the sleeves. So a rolled hem here again. So I've just folded the fabric, given it a little bit of a press, and I've stitched around the bottom as close as I could get to that crease edge. I've then trimmed down my seam allowance, folded again, and I'm just now stitching as close as I can get to that edge the whole way around. Back stitching at the start and the end, and that is my hem nicely enclosed, nice and neat. And that is this little top complete. So I have my tie all nicely in place. I've got my knot tied, got the points at the end of the tie, that lovely little bit of top stitching along the centre front, got my hem all nicely rolled on my sleeves and the bottom. And this is what it looks like on. I love this top for a load of different reasons. It's so quick to make, it's super comfortable. It can be dressed up or dressed down depending on the fabric. It only has 3 pattern pieces. It only takes 1 meter of fabric. I absolutely love this one.
So I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, please do. And I shall see you guys in my next one. Bye folks!